Welcome back. This video will be part 3 of Chapter 5, Psychology and the Law, for PSY 120, Careers in Psychology, Neuroscience, and Human Development. In this section of the chapter, we'll talk about opportunities with a graduate degree. As with most of the career areas that we're going to talk about, there's some aspects of the work related to psychology and law that are specifically require a graduate degree, either a master's degree or a PhD. So we want to look at what each of those looks like. First, being a professional forensic psychologist. So remember how we talked earlier in the semester about how being a psychologist, that word psychologist is a protected career descriptor, meaning there are laws that say in order to call yourself a psychologist, you have to have specific kinds of training and background. So a forensic psychologist is a person who may be asked to, in criminal cases, do assessments. So they may be asked to do competency to stand trial or assessments to determine what a person's mental state was at the time of an alleged crime. Now, again, I mentioned this in part 1 for this chapter. There's a lot of misunderstandings based on popular media about what forensic psychologists do. They do not go out and investigate crimes. That's not what they do. They are brought in after someone has been arrested. They also may be involved in civil cases as well. So they come in and they sometimes they are asked by the court to do an assessment, so by the prosecution. The court sometimes will ask for, in addition to the prosecution may get their own forensic psychologist, the court may ask for someone independent. The defense may ask for a forensic psychologist to do an assessment. So it's entirely possible you'll have 3 different forensic assessments of the same person in the same legal matter. Forensic psychologists are also involved in non-criminal cases. So you can have forensic psychologists who do child custody evaluations. So the court may come in, you have divorcing parents, they're fighting over the kids. The court may come in and say, you know what, we need a forensic psychologist to do an independent assessment. So they do assessments of the kids. They do assessments of each of the divorcing spouses. And provide information to the court so that the court can make a decision. Forensic psychologists may also be involved in doing assessments of injuries. So if a person has experienced a trauma, they've been injured, like I'll give you a concrete, for example, a person's in a massive car crash, they lose a leg. So they've had a leg amputated. The forensic psychologist may come in and be asked to do an assessment of the degree of impact that the injury has had on this person's life, on their well-being, if, say, the person involved in the accident was harmed by another driver who was negligent. So there may be legal proceedings in civil court to determine the damages. These psychologists may have to do the assessment to determine what are the psychological ramifications of their injury. So personal injury litigation cases can involve forensic psychologists on either side. It can involve someone on the plaintiff side or on the defendant's side. Many forensic psychologists are going to work in private practice, while some work in state institutions or in forensic mental health units within prisons. They may also be working in community mental health centers, hospitals, and so on. Most of the forensic psychologists that I know, and this is just purely anecdotal, are people who have doctoral level degrees, who work in private practice as clinical psychologists, but part of their practice is forensic in nature. So it's entirely possible to be a clinician and do part of your caseload in a forensic space. Now, a couple of the people that I know who are forensic psychologists, it is all they do. They do nothing but forensic assessments in criminal cases, or they do nothing but forensic assessments in child custody, or they do nothing but personal injury. That's a rarity. More often, people are going to have a multifaceted practice where they do more than one thing. Forensic evaluations, doing them does require specific training in assessment, and that training should be specific to forensic issues. In my graduate program, my friends who were clinical students who wanted to go into forensic work, they took specific classes and did specific internship and clinical experiences where they were doing assessments in these settings. So they got specialized training. Most forensic psychologists are going to get that specialized training during their internship experiences. Some will get additional specialized training during their postdoctoral programs, where they're on their postdoctoral internships in actual settings doing work. In recent years, for a long time, forensic psychology was strictly a doctoral level thing. In recent years, there have been more avenues opening up for master's level practitioners. So for a period of time, you couldn't get work as a forensic psychologist without a doctoral degree. That is starting to change. If you are a master's level person who has training in assessment, you can work. However, being in independent practice, you can't do that in most states without a doctoral degree and a license. So if you're a master's level practitioner, most likely you're going to be working under supervision of someone with a doctoral degree. Now, with that in mind, since most people who are in this position as a forensic psychologist, they're doctoral trained, the median annual salary is about $90,000. At the master's level, that's going to be significantly lower because you are a person working under supervision. Given that $90,000 is a median, that means that some people are paid far more, some people are paid far less. You have to do your homework and look at where you are geographically, what kind of work environment suits you, and that will, be related to how much you can earn. Correctional psychologists, and again, remember that word psychologist is protected. These are mental health professionals. Typically, they have degrees in clinical or counseling psychology, and they work in prisons and jails. They're going to be delivering therapeutic services, designing activities, and providing supervision of master's level counselors. So in this space, go back to what the salary ranges were for corrections officers. If you are the correctional psychologist or one of several correctional psychologists in a prison setting, you're going to have a whole little army of master's level counselors who work under your supervision. So the correctional psychologist may do a lot of assessment work. Doing diagnostic work and providing a treatment plan. They may deliver actual treatment and mental health services, like working with inmates who have anxiety and depression, but also with more serious mental health problems. And in that case, so if you're dealing with someone who needs medications, the correctional psychologist will work in tandem with medical staff, and that may include psychiatry, to make sure that the treatment plan is followed for their inmates. They may build and then assess rehabilitation programs that are delivered by master's level individuals. They also may be called upon, and this is a controversial area of work, they may be called upon, so as an inmate moves toward probation, or moves toward parole rather, they may be asked by the parole board for assessments of recidivism risk. Like, how much of a risk is releasing this person into the community of recommitting various kinds of crimes? It's controversial because the science of assessing risk isn't great. We're not particularly strong at being able to predict who is the most likely to recidivate. I mean, the predictors that we have are all correlational. That may or may not apply to an actual individual who you're making a decision about. So it is controversial, but it is something that correctional psychologists may be asked to do. Correctional psychologists may be in a position where they are providing advice, recommendations to other staff in their facilities, so corrections officers, admin, other kinds of staff relevant to their work. So like how to manage crises, how to deal with problematic inmates, and other kinds of stressful situations. Police psychologists work, and again, psychologist implies that this is a person at a doctoral level. These are people trained in clinical counseling psychologists, and they are going to do their work in a law enforcement setting. The work environment can be challenging in some ways because of the dual role. Police psychologists, on the one hand, they're involved in employment decisions, like doing testing of candidates to go into police work. They're also doing assessments of fitness of for duty. If an officer is experiencing problems at home and it's impacting their work, the police psychologist may be brought in to do assessments to find out if they're fit to work. So on the one hand, police psychologists are engaged in this pseudo HR kind of work where they're deciding whether or not officers can continue to do the work that they're doing, or whether they indeed can be police officers at all. On the other side of it, though, they're providing therapeutic services to those very same people. So offering counseling, offering treatments, offering group kind of work to help people be more effective. So that dual role can be challenging because sometimes officers, aren't going to want to engage with the police psychologist because of that dual position. So imagine you're a police officer and you go and have a sit down with the police psychologist because you're struggling with trauma after an incident on the job. That same police psychologist may be able to say, you're not fit for duty. I'm not going to recommend that you go back to work. So you can see how that can be a stressful kind of catch-22 in some cases. So despite these challenges, though, the advantages of the position is really making a contribution to the well-being and effectiveness of what police are doing. That can have then trickle-down positive effects on the community. So police psychologists most of the time are going to be hired from the outside. It's only very, very large law enforcement agencies who are going to have police psychologists on staff. More typically, they're going to be hired in from outside sources. I don't have good data on how common this is. Some police psychologists are doubly trained. So they're actually law enforcement officers who perform the police psychologist position as well. So they're double trained. They're trained as law enforcement officers, and they are have the degrees and credentials as psychologists at the same time. I don't have good statistics to tell me how common that is. I would guess that it's more common in very large organizations. Trial consulting is a niche where it's more likely that you're going to have individuals whose training is in social psychology, in personality psychology, but also some individuals who are on the clinical counseling side. You may even have trial consultants who are trained as experimental psychologists, especially in sensation and perception and cognition. Typically, though, they're going to be on the social psychology side of things, because what they're often called upon to do is, before a trial, the trial consultant may be hired on the defense side, they may be hired on the prosecution side in a criminal case, or on the plaintiff side in a civil case. The trial consultant will go over the case. They may look at police reports, witness statements, psych evaluations. They'll look at all the factors, all of the data that they can find, in order, and then provide advice and suggestions to counsel, to lawyers, about what the best narrative, what the best arguments might be given your particular jury pool. These are also individuals who will work with attorneys to build jury questionnaires. So prior to jury selection, attorneys there's a set of standard questions, and then they can add questions that they specifically want to ask potential jurors before selecting them. And the trial consultant can assist with that. They may work with witnesses, practicing their testimony, so that they can communicate effectively. Sometimes trial consultants may be brought in to give expert testimony. And that's where, all the various specialties within psychology, like if it's a memory issue that's related to eyewitness testimony, you may want to bring in a cognitive psychologist who can present the research evidence that states that eyewitness testimony is really, really not that reliable, and so on. You may bring in a clinical psychologist to talk about a specific mental illness. You may bring in social psychologists to talk about the effects of crowding or whatever. So expert testimony is also a possibility. The title trial consultant, though, is typically associated with that person who is, or people who are hired to give feedback to legal teams about jury reactions. One of my classmates, for example, from the University of Nebraska, was actually one of the trial consultants who worked on the O.J. Simpson trial, which is really weird to think about, just how long ago that was, but also the nature of the work. So basically, they were working on the legal team representing O.J. Simpson about how to present information to the jury such that the jury would be swayed in the direction of their client. So basically, the trial consultant is going to work with the legal team to predict jury reactions, to practice different kinds of opening and closing statements with mock juries, to do focus groups with particular kinds of arguments, and so on. I had several classmates who went into trial consulting and built their own firms and did really well. What you do need to understand, though, trial consulting is a, relatively speaking, small niche. It's not going to be, you're not going to look on Indeed or jobs.com or whatever and find a bazillion open positions for trial consultants. These are usually people who have legal training as well as psych training, mostly on the experimental side, who provide highly specialized services to clients who can afford it. So keep in mind that it is a fairly specialized niche. Some trial consultants also work heavily in the area of providing training to attorneys, to legal staff, so that they understand psychological principles well enough to navigate those issues that are related to those principles when they're in court. Another intersection between psychology and the law is in the area of politics. and the creation of public policy. I keep talking about my grad school classmates. I have several classmates who, in my graduate program, who went on to work as research psychologists doing public policy analysis, presenting their best case as to what kind of policies could lead to good outcomes, what kind of policies would lead to bad outcomes, etc. On the politics side, social psychologists are often hired as political consultants for campaigns. So, what kind of ads are going to be the most effective for which audience? What kind of arguments, what kind of talking points, what kind of language is going to have the kinds of effects that they want to have on voters? Some psychologists are directly involved in politics. Some may run for office. Others are going to work in the background to support candidates in the work that they do. Some may do research in polling, in studying the electorate to know where their heads are. They may assist in building briefs or policy documents. They may conduct original research in order to inform legislators. They may help in planning strategies, in drafting policies and laws. There is funding available through the American Psychological Association. If this is something that you have an interest in doing policy work, there is funding available through the APA for congressional fellowships. Now, given the current political climate, you would have to, before you kind of count on that being available, make sure that you keep your eye on current trends. Now, what are some considerations that you need to keep in mind for graduate education and training? For forensic, correctional, and police psychology, anything that involves service delivery, you're going to need to call yourself a psychologist. You're going to need a doctoral degree. To call yourself a counselor, you will need at minimum a master's degree. So becoming a professional forensic psychologist, you need a doctoral degree in clinical or counseling and a specialization in forensic in your pre or postdoctoral fellowships. There are some doctoral programs that are specifically in forensic psychology, but by far the more common route is to get a clinical degree with a forensic specialty. Legal psychology is, there are programs out there where you can get specifically a legal psych degree, but more often you're going to be getting a social or personality doctoral degree with a specialization in legal psychology. So if you're interested in that space, really look for programs that can give you what you want to pursue the career that you desire to pursue. At the master's level, remember, and this will be a common refrain in this class, the term psychologist is specialized and requires a doctoral degree. Master's level practitioners, though, can get licensure and certification to deliver the same kinds of therapy services as psychologists. What they can't do is deliver those services without supervision of a doctoral level individual. So master's degrees in counseling is basically the entry-level degree for providing therapy in correctional and law enforcement spaces. Master's level clinicians working in correctional systems is becoming the norm. So in the past, you could have people who were fairly informally trained running group therapy sessions, but that is no longer the case. The work has become professionalized, and the expectation is if you're going to be doing therapy with inmates, you need to have a license and you need to have a master's degree in order to get that. There are also master's level researchers who work in policy and policy analysis, do consulting in legal areas, and other aspects of the legal system. So lots and lots of opportunities. The real key is for you to think about what kind of work you want to do and then work backwards. Here's the kind of work I want to do. What kind of degrees are required for me to do that work? So for example, if you see yourself delivering therapeutic services for inmates who have addiction, get the education that's going to allow you to do that kind of work. And typically that's going to be a master's degree in counseling psychology, perhaps with an additional specialization in rehabilitation in addiction. So that concludes my coverage of Chapter 5.